we have a great panel. So you heard sort of an assessment of where are we now, what's been happening, what happened on election night. This panel, we have three very, very experienced former Bundestag members, ministers, minister presidents, and we are going to get their take on what is in store for us with coalition negotiations and potentially with the new government. We've got with us the Honorable Marieluise Beck, who was in the first class of the Bundestag where the Greens actually participated in the Bundestag back in 1983. And she served for a couple of terms and then went and joined the Landtag of Bremen, came back to the Bundestag in 1994 and served for 23 years, finally leaving in 2017. And today, she is the director of the Central and Eastern Europe at the Zentrum Liberale Moderne, which she co-founded. So Marieluise, it's great to have you with us today. Thank you.
Hello, good to see you.
We have my dear friend Sigmar Gabriel, who, thank you. Dear friend Sigmar Gabriel, who of course most recently was the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Vice Chancellor of Germany. Prior to that, he was the Minister of Economic Affairs and Energy. And that was during my time as ambassador. So we had a good connection there. And before that, he was the Federal Minister for the Environment. He was one of the longest serving members of the leadership of the Social Democratic Party from 2009 to 2017. He hails from Niedersachsen and is currently the chairman of Atlantik-Brücke. So Sigmar, thank you for being a part of this.
Hi, John. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. And finally, we have Ruprecht Polenz, who was a member of the Bundestag from 1994 to 2013. So he left just as I arrived as ambassador. I won't take that personally. But he was representing, of course, a member of the Christian Democratic Union. And throughout his time in Parliament, he served on the Committee of Foreign Affairs, in fact, chairing that committee from 2005 to 2013, a very, very important time in the life of that committee. After leaving politics, he became president of the German Association for East European Studies. So thank you, sir, very much for being with us.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's get started. And, I'm going to bounce around. I hope this is more a conversation than an interview per se. I do want to say that people should feel free to use the question and answer, the question and answer opportunity, the Q&A key to ask questions, and we'll try to feed some of those in. But let me start, Sigmar, I'm going to start with you. I mean, you were the chief negotiator after the 2013 elections in negotiating with Angela Merkel to form what became the Grand Coalition in that 2013 to 2017 timeframe. How does that process work, and what can we expect from these multiple negotiations that are going to be happening, I assume, simultaneously after this election?
First of all, I think the Greens and the Liberals did a very smart move yesterday evening when they said, okay, guys, whoever will be the chancellor, the first meeting will be among the Greens and the Liberals, and they will discuss where is common ground. I can't remember that this happened before in any other elections. Was always a strong party who invites the smaller one. Here, the two smaller ones invited invite themselves, and I think that's very interesting move. I think we will see a traffic light government before Christmas. It will not be so difficult to form the government. It will be a government which has to be much more ambitious in climate issues that I don't think is too difficult among the Greens and the Liberals and the Social Democrats as well. And in many other areas, we will see more stability than maybe friends from abroad would expect. But I don't think that they will need a lot of time for their negotiations. Again, I found it absolutely smart that the two smaller ones invited themselves. And we will see, by the way, for the first time in German parliament, where no party is dominant. You have two parties around 20% or above 20%, three above 10%, but no dominant party. And this creates a new atmosphere in the parliament. And by the way, when Olaf Scholz will become chancellor, and if it would be Laschet, it would be the same, they will represent less than 20% of the voters. If you count the non-voters, then you will see that the backing among the citizens for the next chancellor is around 20% in our society. That's also something absolutely new. I think they will have it in mind because they need, if they want to run longer than 4 years, they need the support from a broader part of the society. And this will also be something which they will have in mind. But again, on Christmas, we will not see Merkel again with a Christmas speech. I think it will be the new chancellor.
Wow, that's it's different from a lot of the commentary that we've heard recently. You know, pretty interesting. I mean, I've read a lot of folks saying that we would expect the Chancellor Merkel to be giving the New Year's speech. So I just before I start moving around, just to follow up, you mentioned you thought it would be an ample coalition, a traffic light coalition. And it would come together pretty quickly. What gives you such great confidence in that?
It's first of all the psychology of the election day yesterday. It was a disaster for the conservatives, and we will see a conservative party which will have a lot to do to have to develop an idea of what a conservative party should be in the future. They will be much more inward looking than they will be able to negotiate with other parties. You see the enemies of Mr. Laschet, they are starting going around and discussing about who should be the next leader of the party, who should be the next prime minister. So they are looking inwards, not outwards. And the second is, I mean, the Liberals and the Greens, if they would have a Jamaica coalition and to vote for Armin Laschet, you have to explain the public why you are electing the biggest loser in the last elections and the biggest loser ever in the history of the Conservative Party to become the next chancellor. And the guy who won, by the way, more than 5%, if you remember 3 months ago, the Social Democrats were at the level of 14, 15, 16%. So he really jumped up to 25. You have to explain why this guy should not be the next chancellor. It's on a psychological level very difficult to explain, although conservatives and liberals will have be more common ideas for politics than maybe the Greens and the Liberals and the Social Democrats. But I think the psychology is in favor of getting a traffic light coalition.
Well, that's interesting.
And the Conservatives are really destroyed. It seems to be, for me, not clear what kind of party will develop there.
Well, that obviously begs the question to Herr Polenz. Are the conservatives really destroyed? Are they devastated by this?
It was of course
will they just be inward looking, or do you see a road for Armin Laschet to reach out to the Liberals and try to put together a governing coalition? And then I'm going to go to Frau Beck, who really is going to be holding the cards here because her party is going to really determine which of these two folks are chancellor. So think about that. Marieluise will come to you in a minute. But Herr Polenz, what's your reaction to what Sigmar had to say?
Yeah, of course, it was a very heavy defeat on this election day yesterday. And it is obvious that you cannot say we have been defeated and now we want to run the country. But on the other hand, Sigmar Gabriel described pretty well that we have now 4 parties and they have to form a coalition out of 3. And this means, aside of psychology, all parties try to get something for their programs, for their voters, and they might agree to a coalition where they can present their voters most of their program in the coalition treaty. And it is true, we have on the one hand Social Democrats and the Green Party who would like very much to form a coalition. We had on the other side Christian Democrats and liberals who would prefer to be in a coalition together. And one of the two, either the liberals or the Greens, have to move either away from the Social Democrats or away from the Christian Democrats, or to them. And the party who is moving, let's say, in the other camp will get a lot for that, of course. And this might lead to a situation where the Greens say we can get from Christian Democrats nearly everything what we want to achieve in climate policy. And then it might be tempting. I don't know. Of course, if I would have to bet right now, I would also to bet for a traffic light coalition. But we will see. It is. It could be that it is a fast negotiation, but I'm not so sure. I would say I just don't know. It could be also rather complicated.
You must unmute yourself.
Thanks, Marieluise. I'm just in. In 2013, Merkel only was 4 seats short, and that thing went all the way towards the end of December. So who knows on these things? But let me turn to Marieluise Beck. So the Greens are holding a lot of cards here. I mean, you know, honestly, you've got this agreement now, you know, or not agreement, but discussion with the Liberals about what can you agree with and who you're going to approach. But how do you see the Green Party approaching these negotiations, and what in particular are their red lines or the most important aspects that the Green Party would try to get out of the negotiation, and which party, the CDU or the SPD, do you see as most likely to deliver on those important principles?
Well, it was no secret that the Green Party feels close to the Social Democrats, and that their first choice would have been red and green together and repeat what happened in 1998. I think we must give a few words to the development that the choices are not as big anymore, and thus not the possibilities to blackmail each other. To be honest, I was afraid that there would have be a voting outcome where the red and the green could have been starting to negotiate with the liberals, pushing them so much to the wall because they thought in the end we will have 6 or 7% from Die Linke. And this option is gone. And that makes things a lot easier. I never believed that Scholz would really take Die Linke into his government. He is too much of a realo in a positive way, I would say, being, of course, not discussing leaving NATO, of course, keeping up the transatlantic alliance and much more. But I was glad that this option is gone, because of course it forces both liberals and Greens to really be rational, to be modest to a certain extent. And if I look back when Jamaica did not work out, it was exactly more due to psychology than due to real reasons. It was because the Black Merkel and the Green negotiators, all they had to do was look at each other and they understood each other. And the liberals really felt out. And they saw this coming for the next 4 years. And that's when they said, come on, that not with us, that's committing suicide. So I think we do have more rational, more experienced and more modest leaders now. I think that I would agree with Sigmar Gabriel that Scholz is somebody who does not fuss around long. He is somebody who does not talk for hours and hours, but goes for decisions. So I also think that the chances that there will be pretty quick negotiations are good. For the Green Party, in the first case, they don't feel so close to the Christian Democrats, but also helping the obvious loser back to stay in government. You don't do that. You just don't do that. And I'm quite sure that the German voters would not like it at all. This was an election for change. So they must find a way to respect each other in their difference. And you don't need coalitions. There is not people with different ideas and especially way of addressing things. It's not that anybody would say we don't have a climate problem and others. The difference will be in how shall we address it. And that, of course, will need negotiations.
Well, a couple of questions have come in from the audience, and one is how the Liberals and the Greens are going to overcome the major policy differences they have. Now, look, everybody wants to address the climate. That's not going to be a huge problem. I agree with you. It's all going to be in the details of what are the policies. But they have pretty major differences on health policy, energy policy, agriculture, and in particular, budget and fiscal policy. It doesn't take a genius to know that Lindner is going to want the finance ministry as part of the price of being part of a coalition. How do you see that discussion getting resolved, Frau Beck?
I don't see the big difference in health politics. That system is so big and it's almost impossible to really move it in Germany. Many experienced ministers have made that dramatic experience. I think on climate, if you listened, you could have seen that the Green Party has developed, that they understood you can't do it without the market, and you can't do it with new intelligent solutions and technology. It is not back on the trees like Graf Lambsdorff said, I think something like 30 years ago. So I think there are possibilities there. The fiscal question, yes, will be difficult. But again, the possibility to really go much higher with German taxing and thus strangling our enterprises, the Green will understand that. So I think probably they will find solutions to go away from the black zero, where investment into the future is being taken, and keep flexible on this level. This is my estimation.
That's interesting. Herr Polenz, another question that's come in is, would there be any possibility of another grand coalition? Of course, I think given what all of you were saying about there's no way you can have the loser then be at the top of that. It would be the CDU as the under party, if you will, to the Social Democrats. Any chance you see of that happening from your perspective, from the perspective of the CDU-CSU?
No, I don't think so. I always thought that the Grand Coalition was not the best thing for our democracy because, as we see it right now, you have 16 years my party running with Angela Merkel, 12 of these 16 years together with the Social Democrats. And usually you might have said as a voter, they are all exhausted, let's try with the opposition. But it's not sufficient. The opposition of liberals and Greens are not sufficient to form a government on their own. They need either the Social Democrats or the Christian Democrats to form a three-part coalition. And so a grand coalition, as we have had it now for such a long time, is not good. It will not happen again so soon. So I don't think so this will happen.
Okay, thanks. And I saw Sigmar, you were shaking your head no when I raised that question as well. So I assume that's your perspective. I have and you can expand on that if you'd like, but I have another question for you as well, which is when you were doing these negotiations, you were both party leader and well, I guess you were the party leader when you were doing these negotiations. You in 2013, you weren't the standard bearer, but you were the party leader. So now you have Olaf Scholz as the standard bearer, but he's not the party leader. So, and there's, as you talk to people in Germany, a lot of them say, well, you know, Olaf Scholz is more center left, but boy, the leadership of the Social Democrats and the rank and file of the Social Democrats is very far left. And they're going to be the ones that are going to be dry process and how it works. Will Olaf Scholz really be neutered in this process or not? I would imagine he's the one that brought them there. So, and then secondly, if that is the case, what does that mean when it comes to trying to negotiate with the liberals, who obviously would see that there'd be a bigger gap between where they want to go and where a much more left-leaning Social Democratic Party wants to go? What are your thoughts on that?
John, I think it's very easy. Of course, the leader since yesterday evening, the leader of the Social Democratic Party is Olaf Scholz. He's not formally the president of the party or the chair of the party, but he's the leader of the party. And I would say whoever makes his experience with the Social Democrats, my experience is for the first 2 or 3 years, they will follow whatever he wants, wherever he wants to go, because they will remember that with a more leftist leadership, they had 16 or 15%. And when they brought Scholz in the center of the campaign, at the end, they had 25. So this was a campaign which was absolutely concentrated on him. He has every argument to say, I'm the leader of the party. Maybe he don't want to run as a leader of the party, but he has the power. And I think for some years it will stay. Maybe my party sometimes get crazy if they are too long in power, then they overestimate their own ideological ideas. But this will need some years. Until now and for the next years, he has a very, very strong position. I don't think we will see any grand coalition during the next years. By the way, it would not be a grand coalition. It would be a coalition between two 20% parties. And the third is, I think the biggest challenge will not be for these three parties, for the traffic light coalition, will not be in interior politics, not in climate, not in taxation. It will be Europe, because there you have a very progressive part of this traffic light coalition. That's the Greens. They are the most European-orientated party. Mm-hmm. You have parts of the Social Democrats who also want to be more progressive, especially when it comes to a common fiscal policy in the European Union. We see that after the pandemic, the gap between the richer part and the poorer part of Europe is widening. And so the question will be, what are the richer, what are they willing to do to stop these widening gap, because it's inside the Eurozone. And there the liberals are, I sometimes call them economic Talibans. They don't want to step in for a more progressive politics in Europe. And on the other hand side, you have the Greens and parts of the Social Democrats. That will be not so easy, but it will not be play out during the coalition treaty. You will find some headlines, and then they will go into the negotiation after the government is formed with other European member states, and then we will see how they will find compromises. It's not a problem for the first round and the negotiation of the coalition, but next year and over the next years, Europe is the real challenge for every German government.
Well, that's a really really interesting point, and I know there are a lot of tensions in Europe between the sort of the creditor nations and the debtor nations, and this whole idea of fiscal union is a huge flashpoint and sort of a deal breaker, I guess, for a lot of folks in Germany. Marieluise, what is your sense of what an ample coalition, for instance, would mean for the EU? I mean, I actually take some comfort in the fact that, everybody in this, of the four parties, everyone seems to be pretty pro-European. Of course, the question is, what does that mean, and how does that play out? But particularly on the fiscal issues that Sigmar was mentioning, what's your sense of where we might up there?
Just a moment, one tiny remark before I answer your question. Again, if that the Social Democratic left wing, if they are playing it too strong, they lead to the outcome that they are out. They are driving their own party out. So, I mean, if they don't want to be in government, okay.
But this is, as you know, this is not impossible.
I think you believe into your party less than I do, Sigmar.
By the way, we Democrats are having the same issue in Washington right now, let me tell you.
Well, the Greens can be pretty crazy also. So which party can't? Look at the decision they took on the candidate with the Christian Democrats. But okay, talking about Europe, yes, we do have the real question of the fiscal union. This also would have been difficult between the Christian Democrats and especially France if we would have had the old coalition going on. So I think this will really be upcoming years which really demand a lot of responsibility from politicians, and finally getting the message that the world is not turning around the EU. And I think we have not quite understood that. And this is number one. We see it with the Americans. Yes, it was blunt the way they were moving now, and maybe it could have been a little bit less blunt. But on the other side, it showed us that you better wake up. The Americans are not going to take over everything, in the end pay for it, and we come and say, well, they are always playing the world police, So we must hear that there is lessons, and who else could we wish than Biden? I mean, so we got our chance with Biden, and actually we understood. I want to make one more point, being so busy and linked so much to Middle Eastern Europe. It's not only about the European Union, if I may remind that. It is really also thinking the European Union other than a former and still nowadays Western bloc. And we are walking on a very difficult path. We need Poland, we need the Baltic states, we need Romania, even Sweden once in a while is upset. And there is a lot of things to do looking at the East, also including the question, what do we do with Russia, which obviously does not want to be our friend at the moment. So a lot of questions, much more than about fiscal politics.
Sorry, keep forgetting to unmute myself. Well, that's that's an interesting approach. But so we focused on the EU. What about the transatlantic relationship? Herr Polenz, what's your thoughts on what this new government, what its approach, whatever it ends up being? But I mean, everybody seems to think that ample coalition is the most likely of the scenario for the transatlantic relations, for the German-American relationship in particular.
Yeah, of course, in the coalition treaty, it might look like, or it might be written that we have continuity with regard to our general approaches to foreign policy, European Union, transatlantic relations, NATO, and so on and so forth. But the problem is, if the treaty is signed, politics starts. And the politics who is starting is not just what is written in the treaty. It depends on the world if we are discussing foreign policy. And we have a developing, let's put it neutral, a developing relation between China and the United States. And I think we can analyze that this is a predominant point for American foreign policy. America will be very much focused on that. And this means that the United States might ask everybody to take sides. And of course, we have a lot in common with our concerns vis-a-vis China. We don't like this authoritarian approach, the violations of human rights, Tibet, Taiwan, and many other points. But as far as I could see it from the past, the European Union is much more focused on solving these problems via talking, using trade as a tool and something like that. And the US thinking is a bit more also, yes, trade, of course, but sometimes also confrontation. And confrontation is easier done if you have two, one in the White House and one in Beijing. If you want to confront with 28 and one in Beijing, it's a bit more difficult. And I would also like to make a point with regard to the German role in the European Union. You had now many articles how Angela Merkel worked it out that she could broke so many compromises in the European Union. It was also because she had a very strong standing in her own government and within Germany. I agree to the analysis that the new Chancellor, be it Sigmar, Olaf Scholz or Armin Laschet, would be much weaker. He would much more depend on at least two other parties and maybe sometimes also on its own party. And this might change also the negotiations around the Council of Europe and how the European Union is trying to get to results. So this might be also a weakness of our proportional system, parliamentary democracy system, with in comparison with the French system, where you always have a rather strong president who can act very on his own if it comes to foreign affairs. And therefore, I would expect that maybe this is a message to the United States, a very timely one, Macron might play a bigger role in the Europe of the future. And therefore, I use this opportunity to say it would be at least a good idea if there are new alliances with Australia and Japan and India and all the others, you should not put the others in a way, confront them with a fait accompli as it has been in the past. I guess here there are wounds and there are also uncertainties about US behavior in the future. Also, the withdrawal from Afghanistan was executed in a way that many allies, I guess Germany included, felt a little bit overruled, so that we have a lot of problems which we think could have been avoided if the withdrawal of everything would have been planned better. But having said this, I really am convinced transatlanticist. I chaired the German Atlantic Association for some years, and I'm a convinced European, and I do hope that we have really continuity, but in a very much changing world. And this is a challenge for every new government. The world is changing very fast. And last remark, we need also foreign policy with regard to climate change. What are we doing, for instance, in foreign policy to convince Bolsonaro to stop cutting down the rainforests around the Amazonas? We are just complaining about that, but we have no idea to offer him funding or to say, if you continue, we might endorse sanctions. We need this kind of foreign policy also with regard to climate issues, not only with regard to trade issues or security issues in a more narrow sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Sigmar, question for you. We talked about, Herr Polenz raised the issue of China. I think it's pretty clear that the Greens tend to be a little tougher, or wanting to be a little tougher on China and on Russia for that matter than certainly the two parties that are going to be trying to form a governing coalition. And, I guess my question is, you have an ample coalition headed by Olaf Scholz with the Greens and the Liberals part of it. What does that mean for China? What does that mean for the, the German-China or the EU-China investment deal that's sort of languishing right now at the EU? How do you see that playing out?
I mean, of course, the Greens have a much more offensive position when it comes to the situation in China or Russia. But at the end, I mean, it does not change the economic fundamentals in this country and in Europe. I mean, if you don't want to discuss Germany, maybe Australia is a good example. The country is in much more confrontation with China than we are. They just made this deal with the UK and the US in their for their submarines, but they joined the free trade agreement with China, as well as Japan did and South Korea did. And so I only want to raise the issue. Yes, we have, when it comes to security issue and human rights, we have a lot of confrontations with China. On the other hand side, we have a lot of interest in the economics. And I mean, the Green Party is right when they are calling for a more ambitious climate policy, not only in Europe, but all over the world. But if you are in a tough confrontation with China, they will not be part of a Green Deal in the climate issue. Secretary Kerry just tried to get access to the Chinese leadership, and he was sent back home. And the Chinese said, come back when the trade war is over. So I always listen carefully to those who say we have to have a more clear position towards China, but at the end, you need cooperation when it comes to climate, to fighting against pandemics, against the proliferation of nuclear weapons. So a more confrontive position I don't know where it's changed the fundamentals. So yes, there will be maybe a more outspoken policy to human rights and other issues through the Greens, but I would bet a lot that coming back in 3 years, the principal relation to China will not have changed. We are frenemies, enemies when it comes to our political system, our idea about society, but economic partners when it comes to the economy. And that's the reason why it's not so clever to call it a Cold War 2.0, because in the first Cold War, we were economic much stronger than the East. And that's different to China. We need also kind of cooperation and to check where confrontation is necessary, but where are the necessary areas of cooperation. This will be one of the challenges for Europe, not only for Germany, during the next 4 or 5 years, or maybe 10 years.
Yeah, it makes sense. Okay, I got one final question. We're going to go around the horn. We're playing Let's Make a Deal. And the question for Let's Make a Deal is, given these negotiations and given where you all think they're headed, who's going to be finance minister? Who's going to be foreign minister? Who's going to be economic minister? And who's going to be the next president of Germany? Will it be Frank-Walter Steinmeier for a second term or someone else? So Marieluise, I'm going to go to you first. Those four positions, let's make a deal.
I can give you one answer. I think I know who the next president is going to be, because that was publicly announced already. So we will have Frank-Walter Steinmeier for 5 more years. All the other questions I know are decided in the end, not with Cohiba anymore. I remember that Joschka Fischer and Gerhard Schröder retreated in the end with 1, 2, I don't know how many bottles of wine and this Cohiba. And I never saw Olaf Scholz smoke, but I tell you, those questions are going to be talked about the most, because it's wonderful to speculate who will be what, but it will be decided in the end, and then you will have the guys sitting with a plan on the table, who gets what, who has to be pacified. Very important. I guess the leftists have to be pacified within the Social Democratic Party and within the Green Party. An old tactic, pacify those who are against the project. So I just wait.
So you wouldn't even say that, Lindner is finance minister under these anything could happen is sort of your view.
I didn't
Depending
say that.
on how good the wine is and how many Cohibas are smoked. All right.
Okay.
Herr Polenz, what's your take on that? Finance minister, foreign minister, economic minister, president of Germany.
One of the advantages after a lost election is that you can speculate on these personal topics. But I would say I like that Frank-Walter Steinmeier will be the next president for 5 more years. I think he has done his job very good. I really do expect that Linda will become Minister of Finance, because otherwise, in my view, the Liberals will not join the coalition. And then, of course, the Greens have the next choice, and they might choose foreign affairs. And then Annalena Baerbock, who told everybody she is coming from international law, might be, Marieluise, might be the first choice. And then we might have new ministries. I would think that the Greens will really try to form a ministry for energy, climate, part of economics, and look that Robert Habeck will get it. And on the other hand, of course, the Social Democrats will try to form a strong ministry around work and social security with Hubertus Heil. This is what I would expect. Interesting it would be who will become Minister of Interior, which party would get it, probably the Social Democrats. And now I have speculated enough, and in our next round we can look if I'm right or not.
And Sigmar, you get the final word. It sounds like we got 2 votes for Frank-Walter Steinmeier. Continuing, you're going to have a Social Democratic president and a Social Democratic chancellor. And then obviously the other 3 positions. Your successor, once removed, I guess, is foreign minister, economic minister, also a successor of yours, and of course, finance ministry.
I agree to what Ruprecht Polenz said. I think that's the most likely outcome. Yes, it could be possible that somebody has to be pacified. That's true, but
quite a few. Usually, quite a few.
I can call my wife and she will tell you what's her position to this question. And I think Olaf Scholz would even ask Armin Laschet to be chancellor before he asked me to come back in the government. But to be honest, I think that's a rationale in getting bringing the finance ministry to the Liberals. It would be very difficult for them to explain not to have the finance ministry, taxes and budget and other issues. Second, in Germany, it's a tradition that the defense ministry and the foreign ministry is not in the same party if you are in a coalition. I have my doubts that the Greens are interested in getting the defense ministry. And I also have my doubts that the Liberals would like to have it. So then the Social Democrats will get these ministry, and then the foreign office will be maybe by the Greens. It depends how big the climate ministry will be. I'm sure that Ruprecht Polenz is right. That's the question for the Greens. Will they really be able to get on track on the climate issue? Because if not,
which means, excuse me, infrastructure in a wider sense. Infrastructure.
Whatever they need, whatever they need to bring Germany back on track, that will be their interest. Their core interest will be climate. There's parts of infrastructure. There are many issues part of that, because if they would not reach the climate targets in 2030, you will see a second Green Party, which is much more radical. So they have to do whatever they can do to bring together the powers they need to fulfill the climate. And then, unfortunately, I would say the Foreign Office is part of the gambling part of the negotiation. It's not any longer so important because the main decisions are made today in the Chancellor's office and between the heads of state and government. But it's likely that the Greens will get the Foreign Office, and as Mr. Polenz said, the Ministry for Interior will be for the Social Democrats.
Well, that is very interesting. There have been lots and lots of questions wondering that. You've given us a lot of food for thought. We've gone 4 minutes over our time, and I need to pass the baton to David Deissner for our next extraordinary panel. I'd encourage everybody to stick around. We've got 2 of the top journalists in the world who are joining us. But I want to just thank all 3 of you for joining, for your candor, and for supporting these different organizations. And Sigmar, I'll see you in Washington, D.C. in not too distant future. So tschüss, vielen Dank.
Bye-bye.
David, over to you.
Bye-bye.